Hello, folks. I'm so sorry. It's me again. But that's because we've had the privilege of having a new project supported by the Polonsky Foundation. And this one is ongoing. And I think it was the foundation which was enthusiastic this time round about forming a partnership with a German library. And very happily for us, this coincided with our desire to integrate the project with our own cataloguing priorities. The Bodleian library is rich in Latin manuscripts from medieval Germany. And that's because several large blocks of manuscripts from individual religious houses were dispersed in the very nice piano music to accompany me, unscheduled. The Bodleian had these manuscripts from Germany had been dispersed during the 30 Years' War, when Swedish armies were rampaging through parts of Germany, and the agents of Archbishop Laud in England acquired these manuscripts for Oxford in the 1630s. And that's why for this project, we were very, very keen to highlight the origins and provenances very prominently in the project. And over several years, we'd received generous support from Germany, from the Fritz Thyssen Stiftung, for the cataloguing of these collections by Dr. Daniela Meyerhofer. And we were very fortunate for this project to team up with a great research library in Germany, the Herzog August Bibliothek in Wolfenbüttel, whose collections don't come from the same religious houses as ours, but are complementary in the sense that they are structured around large collections from individual monastic houses. And just to give you a sense, one of the religious houses is the Cathedral of St. Kilian in Würzburg, and our collection of manuscripts from Würzburg is the most coherent collection of Carolingian 9th century manuscripts in the United Kingdom. And especially important as a foundation which maintained the memory of its insular foundation, its foundation by Anglo-Saxon missionaries, in the forms of script that it used. And the manuscripts from Würzburg were one group which Daniela Meyerhofer catalogued, and she agreed that an epitome of her very detailed descriptions should be placed online as part of the project. So one aspect of this project has been the balance between a detailed catalogue of manuscripts already existing in book form, the epitome of those descriptions placed online in our online catalogue of medieval manuscripts, and then the extraction from that of metadata particular to individual images to accompany the digital images. So there is there are those sort of three levels, and it's the relation of those levels that has been part of the project. And just to give you a sense, this is a selection of manuscripts from another of the houses involved in the project, the Cistercian Abbey of Eberbach. And these are a selection of, you can see I've refined the search by, these are 12th century manuscripts from Eberbach. This was another adventure, this project, again with known unknowns and unknown unknowns. The greatest unknown unknown was the virus, and I won't say much more about that because that's already been beautifully, I think the implications of that and the experience of that have been beautifully outlined by our colleagues from Cambridge and Heidelberg. Just to say that although our photographic studio came to a halt in the virus, the studio of the Herzogs-August-Bibliothek did not. And there was therefore a great deal of envy in Oxford of the continuation of the project by our German partners. But we have been granted by the Polonsky Foundation a no-cost extension to the project to allow us to fulfill it to fulfill the photography over a slightly longer period. The other, perhaps slightly more known unknown, was the background of Brexit for us. It was inevitable that our partnership would be viewed in the light of modern political events. I think I could say more about that, but time is against me. But I think the project provided encouragement to us to take the long view of relations between countries. The foundation of Würzburg was part of the Christianization of the European continent by Anglo-Saxon missionaries in the 8th century. And so it encouraged us to look at the relationships over a longer time period. Finally, I want to come back to a question which others have raised, particularly Kathleen Doyle from the British Library, about audiences for our projects. And to think slightly more carefully what digitization is for, something that perhaps we've taken for granted more than we should. There are some very striking recent statistics from the Wellcome Trust, revealing that the vast majority of the digital images they have created of its collections have not so far ever been looked at. That may be disappointing, but for us at the Bodleian, in an institution founded in 1602, accustomed to long-term investments, that may not matter so much. We don't throw manuscripts away because no one has called them up to the reading room recently. On the other hand, there is the non-scholarly, the wider public, in which the more immediate impact does matter. And I think that in terms of these projects, the one between the British Library and the Bibliothèque Nationale de France really blazed a trail. And I have the sense that the Polonsky Foundation itself has become increasingly interested in the wider public reach. And certainly at the Bodleian and in Oxford University as a whole, education has become a much more central part of our mission, education beyond the university itself. And we have, for instance, our first ever education officer on the staff of the library, working with schools. Public engagement was not so much part of the original plan of this project, but it has, as we've gone along, we have stressed it more. And I was privileged to have a very interesting conversation with Mark Polonsky quite recently about how a project would be affected if we thought from the very beginning about public engagement in all aspects of the project. And we thought about various aspects, that it might affect the choice of manuscripts, that it might affect the balance between the mass of images and the contextual and interpretative guides, that if we wanted to capture a school's audience, we might need to pay attention to the national curriculum, which teachers are under great pressure in the United Kingdom to link to, that it might be possible to build in an element of crowdsourcing I noticed from the project The Scribes of the Cairo Geniza that contributions are invited from the public for transcriptions from Hebrew and Arabic. Our own experience of crowdsourcing has been that it achieves very slowly what the library itself could achieve much more quickly and easily, but that's not the point. The point is to engage the public in the effort. I think that, as Kathleen Doyle said, the public interest in the materiality of manuscripts as handcrafted objects is, you cannot overestimate how important that is to the public, and we might think of including more of that. And finally, as Kathleen also said, the use of social media, not by me, I hasten to add, is very, very important to highlight interest, to drive traffic to the website. There are lots of people out there trying to attract attention. Of course, if your partner is the Vatican Library, you have a certain advantage, because the Vatican has a profile in the world perhaps beyond what other libraries can reach. So these are some of the considerations that I think might come at an earlier stage to us in future projects. The great challenge, I think, for us in the future is how to make the same material useful both to the scholarly world and to the wider public. And that will be the big challenge for our third project, if we ever have one, but I may be putting my feet up by then. And now I will hand over to Torsten Schassan in Wolfenbüttel, who will speak more about the technical aspects of the project. And so I will.
So, thanks, Martin, and thank you for the organizers, and thank you most of all, first of all, to the Polonsky Foundation for the generous support of the project. Yes, I will be talking about several aspects here: technical, metadata, managerial, and outreach and dissemination. And jumping right into it, this project brought us to next levels on various fields. For example, in our imaging studio, we were reaching the 600 dpi for the first time. Although we were one of the first libraries, at least in Germany, to digitize manuscripts and put them online. Our digital library started back in the last millennium in 1998, but only with this project, we arrived at this high quality of imaging with the possibility to acquire a phase 1 camera in the course of the project. We were reluctant to do this before because of the storage amount needed for this data, but we said that this project will be worthwhile to do so. This is one thing. The next thing was that we didn't have the power to implement IIIF right ourselves. We have been following the development of IIIF from the beginning, but we didn't put it in place. So in the course of this project, we were able to at least develop a test case and implement IIIF for the project data, but we will not have it ready for all our manuscripts and all our digitized objects, whether it will be prints or special collections or whatever. So this is something still to be done. This means that we needed to invent a double workflow for the imaging. One to share the images in the usual digital library that we have, and a special workflow to publish the images as well in this IIIF test surrounding. The second decision we had to make is how to collect the data for the manifests of this IIIF implementation. So we had to invent something here as well, which made us make up our mind in order to pass the way for the full implementation of IIIF in the library. And then when I spoke about storage space, that's not the only issue here, but all the data has to be transferred to the user as well. So our server technology had to improve, for example, concerning caching and other mechanisms. And this is the first lesson learned in this area as well. These improvements were possible and fast implemented only because of the close cooperation between Bodleian and HAB, and that some knowledge was available already in the Bodleian, or that they had the IIIF implementation, all this caching and server technologies available, and that we could make use of their knowledge, and that it was exchanged generously. And I mentioned it, the generous funding of the Polonsky Foundation made it possible to get our digitization to the next level. Alongside the imaging comes the metadata. Others have spoken about that as well, and I mentioned it already, that the metadata workflow had to be established, and we had to take the same decisions where or which data to present in the manifest. We already had such a kind of an extract of the long descriptions that we try to produce, which we call the shelf mark file, which represents the manuscript in contrast to the description of a manuscript. We already had that in place, but should we use this very brief information, or should we supply the descriptions themselves? We decided in the course of the project that we do not only use the shelf mark file, but in order to arrive at a coherent level of metadata with the Bodleian libraries, we should prepare something that we call like shelf mark file plus, which has some more information than just our shelf mark file, which gives very basic information about identification, placing and dating of the manuscripts, materials, size, and so on. Especially needed was the information about the text contained in the manuscripts and the provenances in order to show to which monastery the manuscript belongs. And this was what we needed to add to the information that we had already. Then the metadata quality should be coherent with the Bodleian library, as said so. But we needed to have the metadata at all, let's say, and there we were fortunate to have a parallel cataloging project going on, which dealt especially with the collections where most of the manuscript, the monastery collections are located in, which is the former Helmstedt University Library, which is now our Helmstedt collection. And we have a project going on since more than 10 years, which catalogs especially this collection. And this project was crucial to identify the provenances, for example, so that we knew in advance which collections were from which monasteries, and that we could include them in this project. But still, there was the need not only to use these cataloging results, but some things were still to be updated or enhanced. For example, the structural metadata to make a closer connection between the description of the manuscript and the imaging. But in comparison with the BOD, and especially our way of how to store the information in both institutions, we use TI encoding for the descriptions and concerning the data that we want to expose in the manifests and in the IIIF surrounding, it was quite similar, so that there was not too much adjustments to be made here. Apart from that, we have to consider the project portal, which comes along with its own data. This is due to the fact that if I got it right, it's a WordPress installation, and there the data has to be stored in another way. So we have to provide the same information that we have already in the manifests and in our own digital libraries. We had to prepare it for the third place for the project portal, and some harmonization was needed then. Norm data had to be applied and so on. So the lessons learned, I would say, from this metadata aspect is that there are synergies between projects, cataloging projects, digitization projects, and so on, infrastructural projects, and these are essential in order to make these kinds of projects a success. Although the funding is very generous, there's always something that needs to be added from different points of view. And for example, the pre-existing catalogs, which helped us to identify the provenances, are a good example here. What I would call managerial aspects is that we have a kind of like cultural differences in financing. The funding is based upon the number of images. So we have to write our report and have to do our balances according to this. But we hire our staff based on monthly salary, and we have always to deal with these different approaches to these balancing onto these financial aspects. And then there's the importance of the conservation department, which is part of the workflow in the library, which has to check each manuscript before the digitization and see whether it's possible to do it, or to prepare it for digitization, or to take care of it after digitization, and especially for stabilizing the binding is a very common thing. You have to take this into consideration, and I have to include it somehow in the project. Lessons learned here is kind of funny thing, or funny expression. The funding is not an easy task because of like the cultural differences in financing and how to find your ways between the different approaches. And it goes well for both sides, both on the funding side as well of the side of the project partners. And last, the outreach and dissemination. We still had to catch up with all the social media and outreach things and approaches and attempts that are more common in other libraries, and other institutions and other countries. Let's say, so a blog and social media accounts had to be set up in the Herzog August Bibliothek, and we need specialized personnel for that, which we didn't have before. In the course of the project, we were able to establish this and make it a common thing in the library to go this way and to get in contact with the greater audience and wider public. But it turned out that one of the reasons why we didn't have these things was probably that impact is not measured in Germany in the same way as it's done in Great Britain. It might be in the near future that these things are more and more important, but in the past it wasn't that way. And so the need to approach the wider audience and to really like calculate the impact here was not as important. Although I have to say that when Martin mentioned future approaches to schools, I said, like, we were in contact and we had established the contacts to schools since decades, but we didn't have contacts to social media. So it's we were stronger in the one part and weaker in the other. So that the lessons learned here is, again, there might be differences in cultural traditions, but in the exchange, we could learn from each other. And it just might be that the HAB is has been a too small institution to have like all specialized personnel for all blogging and social media and so on. But we learned about the importance of all that beyond all our research activities and funding that we have apart from a project like that. And that was it from my side.